one is really well represented in the West, and that's the Brahma Sampradaya. The others are the Rudra Sampradaya, the Kumara Sampradaya, and the Sri Sampradaya. But these are not very well represented in the English language. They are mostly available in the Indian languages back in India. So the first thing of yama in the beginning of yoga is to accept a spiritual master who is coming down in the Brahma Sampradaya and take shelter by initiation. And what does that mean? Well, in the Brahma Sampradaya, there are 4 requirements for initiation. One has to give up meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex life. Well, these 4 things are pretty much the foundation of Western civilization. Meat eating, intoxication, illicit sex, and gambling. So basically, one has to adopt an Eastern yogic lifestyle. One has to become a monk. And if we're not willing to do that, then we don't qualify for this initiation, and a bona fide guru would not accept us. So the first thing we have to do in the study of yoga is to become pure enough to be acceptable by a bona fide spiritual master. That's really the first step of yoga, yama. And niyama begins with rejecting meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex life. Yama niyama. Well, there are lots more details, but you get the picture. So if we are to study yoga successfully and reach the perfection of samadhi, then we have to start from the beginning on the right foot. If we try to skip over some steps, especially the preparatory steps of yama niyama, and just begin with asana, pranayama, and so on, then we won't be able to get very far. And sure enough, the Western yoga schools do not teach the higher stages of yoga. They teach only asana and a little bit of pranayama. They don't really teach anything beyond that. Why? Because if they tried to teach it, it wouldn't work. Why not? Because the students aren't qualified by yama niyama. Neither are the instructors, by the way. So this is one of many, many examples of how a bona fide spiritual teaching, sourced in the original Vedic literatures, becomes changed, altered beyond recognition in transition to the West by people who don't really know what they're doing. Let's take another example. Tantra. We've all heard of Tantra. It's quite controversial. It involves meditations based on sex, right? Wrong. Tantra, in the original, is a large collection of literatures about all kinds of different subjects. But the common theme is how to live a spiritual life in the material world. Now, in one corner of the Tantras, maybe 3 or 4 volumes of those 11,000 different books that we talked about that are all termed Tantras, there's a few books, a handful, on how to have good sex life. Okay, that's part of life, granted. Making nice children is a very important skill for householders. But there are so many other things one needs to know to live a spiritual life in this material world. How do you build houses? How do you manage a community? How do you take care of animals? How do you take care of people, for that matter? How do you manage a farm? How do you manage a city? How do you build things? How do you do stuff? How do you design things so that they're harmonious with nature, and so on and so forth? How do you farm in such a way that the land isn't depleted over time? We have to know these things, or we're going to get ourselves in trouble. So the Tantras cover all these different subjects in tremendous detail. How to live in God's kingdom without ruining it, Unfortunately, we haven't paid much attention to that skill. We're ruining the world as fast as we can and trying to do a better job all the time. And we're largely succeeding. So because we're not paying any attention to the tantras, what are the tantras exactly? Well, they're books of instructions. This is how you do this is how you do that. Just like there are so many books, computers for idiots, right? Well, this is how to live in this material world for sadhus, for those who are intent on developing their spiritual life. And if you follow the tantras, then you will find that your life becomes very nice, becomes very pleasant and peaceful and spiritual and happy. But if we don't follow the instructions in the tantras, then we're going to get into trouble. So how come all we know about the tantras is the sex part? That might be 1% of the tantras or less. And yet it's being blown up as the whole thing. It's about the same as saying that Borders is a pornographic bookstore because they stock a couple of copies of The Joy of Sex. It's ridiculous. Well, this is part of the disinformation campaign that was mounted to discredit Vedic sources and to steer people's attention away from them by making them look ridiculous. Yes, it's ridiculous, the idea that you can attain enlightenment through sex. It's not possible. It may be possible for Shiva or somebody like that, but it's not possible for an ordinary human being, so forget it. This is a distortion of the original purpose of the tantras. That's not what it is really about. So how did these distortions come into existence, and why are they being peddled in the West as the original material? This is because there are people with an interest to keep our attention off of the original materials and knowledge. Now, who are those people? Well, ask yourself, who benefits by keeping the population ignorant about the real spiritual values of life? Who benefits by disempowering everyone from spiritual advancement and turning their attention towards material things only? Who benefits? Those are the people who are most interested in misleading us and keeping us from the real spiritual teachings. So if you analyze the situation, you can understand that there are a lot of people who have an interest in keeping us away from real spiritual knowledge. And this has been going on for quite some time. And we have understood the history of this whole mess in the Esoteric Teaching Introductory Seminar, and we teach it. So this leads us to the next step, which is real liberation from material entanglement. And that's a necessity. But before we can get to that point, we have to reject the false teachings and accept the real teachings. What we're teaching is coming directly from the original Vedic source material. We haven't changed even one word. Therefore, one should take shelter of this esoteric teaching if he really desires to advance in spiritual life and rediscover his perfect body. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of My Perfect Body. This is David Hughes, your host, reminding you to visit us on the web at esotericteaching.org.